Nebraska's Tony White is a top 3 defensive coordinator in the Big Ten. We discussed next on Locked On Nebraska.
You are Locked On Nebraska, your daily Nebraska Cornhuskers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Today's episode is brought to you by Monopoly Go. I admit it, I have a competitive side, and it's a big fan of Monopoly Go, the mobile hit twist on the classic Monopoly board game. So join your friends and download Monopoly Go free on the App Store and Google Play. Thanks for making Locked On Nebraska your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get podcasts and on YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, good morning. We are headed toward practice number 11 of Nebraska
Correct.
spring ball here today. Tony White will talk about the progress or lack of progress that his defense has made. You asked the question in the cold open there, Nebraska. But I was just, when I knew we were going to talk about this morning, I pulled up some just, really boilerplate defensive stats from last year. And Nebraska was, top 10-ish in the country in a lot of different major statistical categories. And they bring a lot of those players back from last year. And so I think the question is really fair. Like, is Tony White one of the top defensive coordinators in the Big Ten or even in the country? The interviews that he did this past offseason would tell you that he's a pretty well sought after guy.
Also, the interviews that he did with media this offseason would have you believe that he doesn't think he's a top 10 or a top 3 defensive coordinator in the Big Ten. He said he had some choice words for what kind of a defensive coordinator he is actually, but that's Tony White being modest. And I think if you look around the Big Ten, and there is quite a group of defensive coordinators in the Big Ten. So instead of trying to make the case that Tony White's the best defensive coordinator in the Big Ten, I think it's better to go top 3, top 4, something along those lines. If he continues to do what he's done at Nebraska, then you can put him in that conversation. You can put him in the conversation now. But to make an argument that he's the best, I mean, look, Phil Parker at Iowa, Wink Martindale at Michigan, those guys have a long history of, not the game show hosts, they have a long history of producing defenses that are top 5 in the country on a year after year basis. So Tony White has not done that at Nebraska, but what he did at Nebraska in 1 year was give the Huskers the best defense that they've had in the Big Ten era. So that goes back to 2011. And that's quite a feat when you're in your first year and you're introducing a brand new scheme. Nebraska was top 7 in the country in yards allowed per play, which is a stat that I like to go to. So I had a conversation last week with someone who is connected to the agent world, the coaching world, athletic directors. It was a private conversation, so I don't want to say who it was, although I don't think he would mind. And his words about Tony White were that Tony White has head coach written all over him. So it's going to be a short period of time at Nebraska to be able to enjoy what Tony White is doing. I would imagine probably another year, but have fun while it's here, because he's one of the best that there is in this now 18-team conference.
It's funny, Mitch, because I always go back to, when we talk about Nebraska's defense, I always go back to Rule's quote, as Tony White was going through the entire process, potentially becoming the San Diego State coach, potentially becoming the UCLA coach. And it was, we're going to be good at defense pretty much no matter what, point blank period. We're going to be good at defense, whether Tony White's here, whether Tony White's not here. And that wasn't a slight at Tony White. It's just how Nebraska is going to build their program under Matt Rule. And so I think about that, and not to, like I said, not to take credit away from Tony White. He is, the architect of this defense, but it's kind of built into the program's DNA, which is really interesting. I wonder, going into the second year of this defense in particular, a lot was made of the 3-3-5 last year, and they mix up like formations and who's down and who's.
Yeah, it's a lot of different stuff. It's
Like,
it's
it's
gonna be
not
4-2-5, whatever.
right. Like it's not just the 3-3-5, but a staple of the defense in particular is, the fact that they're moving around. It makes you guess a little bit. You don't really know where pressure is coming from. And so I wonder if going into the second year, teams have a better idea of how to grasp it. They didn't figure it out last year. So I wonder how that plays into the second year of Tony White's defense. But yeah, I expect it to be really, really good.
I think that's where the chess game comes in, and that's where, you really start to understand someone's coaching acumen, because absolutely, they're gonna be better scouted this year. There is some chaos in the Big Ten, I think, with the addition of USC, UCLA, Oregon, and Washington, and that teams will be watching teams that are set to play those four, or any of those four, which is everyone. But Nebraska will play SC and UCLA. So there's a different level, I think, of attention that needs to be paid to the schools that are new, and maybe that takes away a little bit from like doubling back and studying up on, hey, what was Nebraska doing in 2023 that was different than we've ever seen before, and how can we, as let's say Iowa, counter that with a new strategy. So you may see some a bit of a dip this year in the way that we're used to the Big Ten being so well scouted. It's tougher with 18 teams, but the challenge for Tony White, and I think the one that he accepts and will succeed at, is then understanding how you might be scouted by a team that you played in 23 and again in 24. And then what do you do in response to that? What's your next move? How do you diversify your defense in a way that your opponent is not expecting? And with as many parts as Nebraska has, I mean, we saw White play 20 plus defenders in critical situations last year, like mid 20s. It was a deep defense, and they want to do that again. They want to play 7 or 8 defensive linemen. They want to play 7 or 8 linebackers, 10, defensive backs, 12 defensive backs, whatever it might be. He'll be in a good spot to counteract whatever it is that teams find as, a potential antidote for the Tony White 3-3-5.
Well, and one thing that's been talked about this entire time throughout spring ball has been, hey, can they get takeaways? Can they take that next step? Can they be more disruptive on defense? And they were okay. I mean, they were pretty good in sacks last year. They ended up having 32 sacks last year. It's like over 2.5 sacks a game, which ranks pretty high in Matt Rule's team's histories. But I was looking at turnover stuff and the amount of times that they were able to get the ball away, 14 times last year. And then you pair that along with 31 offensive turnovers, and it's, it's really bad. It's minus 17 in the turnover margin for Nebraska last year. Usually Matt Rule teams make a jump in that second year in terms of taking the ball away. It didn't happen from year 1 to year 2 at Baylor, but it made a huge jump in year 1 to year 2 at Temple. Mitch, they took away the ball 13 times in Rule's first year at Temple, and in his second year, they took the ball away 30 times. If Nebraska made that kind of jump this year, they'd be like contending for a Big Ten title probably.
Yeah, final quick thought, and I may have talked about this in one of our previous episodes this week. Cut me off if I did, but Tony's intensity, and he's very aware of that, of the fact that they weren't good enough at creating turnovers in 2023. But his intensity, it's on display the second that he walks out on the practice field. And being out there on Tuesday, I saw him yelling at his defensive linemen, yelling at the linebackers, repeat this rep, go back and do that. Somebody needs to step up and help hold these players accountable. He was barking at John Bullock, his veteran linebacker. So there's no rest. I asked Tony White when I talked to him in February or early March, I said, hey, have you got a little bit of a time to relax here? Now that recruiting's over and spring practice is still a few weeks away. And he's like, absolutely not. There's no downtime, no quiet time at this part of the calendar year. So that's who he is. And, that's why I will stand behind that statement that he's one of the top 3 in the Big Ten. So after the break, we are going to talk about a story that I've got out this morning, Thursday morning on The Athletic. That's very relevant to the future of college football as it relates to scholarship limits and NIL. So please subscribe. Follow us on Twitter at Locked On Nebraska. Email us at LockedOnNEB at Gmail. That Twitter account is Locked On NEB also. Watch us on YouTube. Listen to us on all the podcast platforms. We'll be back in a couple minutes.
Hey, if you think about your financial future, think about Yahoo Finance, which is a great sponsor of this very podcast. Maybe you think you've done it all. You've saved, you've researched, you've invested all that you can. Now you need to take it all to the next level by using what every financial great uses, and that would be Yahoo Finance. For more than 25 years, Yahoo Finance has been the brand behind great investors. Whether you're seasoned or you're looking for a little extra guidance, Yahoo Finance gives you the tools and the data that you need in one place. Securely link your brokerage accounts and other investments, receive a comprehensive perspective, and the ability to look at your wealth in its entirety. For comprehensive financial news and analysis, visit the brand behind every great investor, yahoofinance.com, the #1 financial destination, yahoofinance.com. One more time, yahoofinance.com.
Okay, segment 2 on Locked On Nebraska on a Thursday. Connor, I know this is a topic that's near and dear to your heart, and it's why I rearranged the show to be able to get into this on this Thursday and not have to wait until Friday. You with your spreadsheets and your scholarship counts and getting how does Nebraska get to the 85? I don't really think it matters that much anymore. We have to accept a new reality that the 85 is kind of an antiquated number in college football. And the Athletic is doing a series of stories this month here in April on the transfer portal and on NIL. And these are of course landscape altering events and things that are affecting college football today. So I teamed up with Austin Meek, who covers Michigan for The Athletic, and Seth Emerson, who covers Georgia. And we looked at the different ways that schools are able to use NIL to impact their scholarship numbers. And interestingly, at a place like Georgia, which has high-end talent galore, throughout its roster, they don't worry about getting players 86 through 94 and finding a way to create room for them. But Matt Rule was very open about the way that Nebraska handles this. And in talking to him last week, we sat down in his office and he discussed the benefit of this and how Nebraska benefits from the 1890 initiative, communicating with players who wouldn't otherwise be on scholarship, and it gives Nebraska an advantage. It kind of brings the ball back into Nebraska's court that it had started to lose with the emergence of, I would say, FCS programs in the Dakotas, the rising cost of an education. So it's something that levels the playing field, and they have to be on 85 football scholarships, but that's not really relevant anymore.
No, not at all. It's really interesting. In reading through your guys' story, just the different approaches for the situations that like Nebraska wants to, give off and they want to become this. They want to be a developmental program. And so you just mentioned it, guys who might have missed out on scholarship offers and ended up at North Dakota State or South Dakota State. They're probably going to get scholarship offers from Nebraska now. And Nebraska could take in more on their roster, and it lends itself toward a program that develops those types of players because they, are able to get that type of practice time. And like, think of how many Nebraska actual players that they've had, players who have played for them, I'm talking about, who have been quote unquote walk-ons over the years, but they were also like local high school football stars as well.
Mm-hmm.
It's happened a lot. Those guys are going to be scholarship guys now. And that's cool. I think that's a good thing for those players. And it's a positive thing for development. And it's also like, how Georgia's approaching it, where, they could probably be okay with 75 scholarships or less.
NFL teams got what, 53
exactly,
players, and they play 18
exactly.
games, 17, 18 games. Yeah, Georgia doesn't need 85.
You're going to see a lot of those guys continue to transfer, who are beyond the 60 and 60 plus that you need in order to win a national championship. And so you're right, it does level the playing field. I think that's a really important note.
A couple interesting things that Rule had to say in this story. One, he talked about one player in particular, in Favian Sanford, who was a senior defensive back last year, came to Nebraska as a walk-on, spent the majority of his career as a walk-on. They were able to put him on scholarship last spring, and then it looked like if he was going to stay in the program, that he would be on NIL aid in the fall. As it turned out, there was a departure before the fall, and they were able to put Sanford on football scholarship. But in many cases, you'll have a player like that who really the only way you can keep him around is if they're on an NIL version of a scholarship. It's not a scholarship, and it's not something that Nebraska talks. That Matt Rule doesn't sit down and talk money with the players about, hey, you're going to get this. He sends them to 1890, and then he trusts that 1890 will take care of those players. He said that he's got someone from an NFL front office who's inquiring about Favian Sanford. Now, he's not going to get drafted next week, but they want to bring him into a camp and have him in their training camp, use him on special teams if he makes the roster. Maybe he's a taxi squad kind of a guy. So yeah, that's not a player that Nebraska should have to worry about being a walk-on, especially when you're a 5-7 program as Nebraska is right now. And then finally, I did ask Rule about kind of the backwards nature of this. Like I mentioned, he doesn't negotiate these contracts. No one inside Memorial Stadium does. And his comment to me, I found interesting. He said, to be honest with you, I never want to be the one talking money with players because I want their relationship with me to be about football. But the way things are done, I'm recruiting someone here who's dealing with a third party, and then I'm beholden to that third party. It's definitely backwards. So, just a taste of what he had to say. Go check out the article. Pretty interesting and some pretty transparent stuff from Matt Rule.
Yeah. And then we saw a little piece of legislation, I guess, yesterday that came through that, would probably lend itself to eventually getting to the point where it gets a little forward for
does, right? You can go from backwards to forward, where you can actually start to we're trending in this direction where all of this NIL stuff, it actually starts to make sense and starts to look like a model that you see in the pro leagues. And I know people don't want to go there. They don't want to see that. They don't want to accept that college football is like a scaled down version of the NFL. We're past that point. It's already there. We're just doing it in somewhat of a backwards way now.
Yeah, good story. Check that out on The Athletic. All right, when we come back for segment number 3, it's the hot button issue all the time around here. Nebraska, Colorado. They're going to play each other again this year. They're approaching things in different ways. Again, we'll talk about that when we come back, but we're just talking a little bit about the NFL draft. You want some NFL draft coverage? Locked On NFL Mock Draft is available right now. Check out the ultimate 6-episode series to hear who the local Locked On experts are picking for every NFL franchise. It includes live reactions from local college football experts and the fantasy football angle as well. Find the Locked On NFL Mock Draft now on Locked On NFL Draft on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts.
All right. Thank you, as always, for supporting our sponsors. I want to tell you right now about Monopoly Go. I've been tracking the leaderboard every day, keeping my eye on the scores, putting my heart into it, and I'm pumped to announce that I am finally on top. That's right. I'm talking about the hit mobile game Monopoly Go. You've probably heard. It's been downloaded more than 150 million times. This is a great twist on the classic board game Monopoly, and you can play anywhere, anytime. Explore hundreds of Monopoly boards from Las Vegas to Camelot to the moon, all while raking in a fortune. How do you play? You charge rent on iconic properties just like in classic Monopoly, or go after your friends' Monopoly money by pulling bank heists and taking wrecking balls to their landmarks. So go see what a Monopoly tycoon is, who's gone bankrupt, Get yourself on the leaderboard. Download Monopoly Go on the App Store and free on Google Play.
All right, September 7th, 2024, Nebraska will play Colorado again for the fourth time in 6 years.
Looking for that first win, Nebraska.
Still looking for that first win. That's exactly right. These last, the one last year looked a little bit different. Not so much in the scoreboard result, but definitely in how the programs have approached things. And Deion Sanders is once again making headlines during the summer, more so for what he's not doing, and what he does not seem to be doing is recruiting at all. He is outsourced the recruiting to his children, who are expecting to get direct messages from players who are in the portal, who would be interested in playing at Colorado. I talked about this a little bit yesterday, Mitch, on my show. It has been a low energy operation from the very beginning. It does, seem as if it's, what I said, where I came out with it, is I've never been more convinced that the second his kids are gone, that Deion Sanders is gone. And I've never been more convinced than I am right now. I definitely feel that way with all the news over the last, 72 hours here.
Unsustainable is the word that comes to mind for me. I mean, credit to Shiloh Sanders for, on the day the transfer portal opens, Colorado apparently didn't have another plan here, or maybe this is part of their grand plan. Maybe we saw last year how Colorado fever swept the nation in September, and there were all the naysayers out there that Deion could point his finger at and say, you didn't believe. Did you believe? Maybe we're just not believing right now in what Colorado's doing. We're not understanding like the multi-level strategy. And part of that is for Shiloh Sanders to go on his Instagram story and say, defensive transfers, DM me. Offensive transfers, DM Shadur, his brother, Shadur Sanders, the quarterback, who's a future NFL quarterback. You're talking about a big time player. This is nothing against like the talent that Shadur Sanders has or Travis Hunter has. These are tremendous college football players. Shiloh Sanders, good college defensive back, but I don't know how you can even think that it's viable to run your football operations where you've got your players on social media reaching out to just casting the wide net and saying, hey, you want to transfer to Colorado? Come just DM us. That doesn't work over the long term.
No, it doesn't. And so, September 7th is a really important one for Nebraska. I mean, that would be pretty bad if they lost that game at this point. I believe Colorado opens up with North Dakota State, by the way.
It does. It does.
So that one's kind of tricky in and of itself, but yeah, man, like I don't know. It's certainly not like it is. If you want to look at two directly opposite approaches, whether it comes to just the energy in which you recruit or how to build your roster or how to interact with people, how to build relationships, like Nebraska, Colorado on the direct opposite side of that.
It really is fascinating because they're so different in so many ways, not just in the way they recruit, but in the I talked about transparency with Matt Rule in the last segment, but the transparency that he offers as a window into his program. We got into Dylan Raiola's interview. We had to get his name in there. Dylan Raiola's interview with Will Compton in the Bussin' with the Boys podcast. I watched a video yesterday of Rule giving Compton and his Bussin' Boys a tour of Rule's downtown apartment, his recruiting pad, and Rule's wife Julie was there. We saw the movie theater, really everything. It's like a tribute, an homage to the Rule family, but also to Nebraska football and what its vision is for the future. I mean, this is the kind of stuff where Nebraska as a program is laying things out there for the public and the recruits and the players to be able to see what it does, what its plan is. And then you contrast that with Colorado, where it's like, we're giving you nothing. I mean, Deion is doing essentially nothing, and he's putting his sons as the guys in charge of trying to appeal to prospects out of the transfer portal.
Yeah, it's there was a USA Today story comparing the two approaches, and this was more about coaches going out, right, going into recruits' houses or going into other people's houses. So it said that Rule, in the story, it said that Rule has had 486 off-campus contacts, and I would assume since he's been here, that's the number. Didn't give it out for Deion, but he did say at the end of the story, I want to read you the quote because it's pretty funny. I really truly believe, this is from Deion Sanders, I really truly believe in all my heart that parents don't want me at their house. Sanders said this in an unsolicited speech about the topic in March of this year. They want to come see my house. They want to see how I live. They want to see how I get down. They want to see what I've got going on and what God has done in my life. That's from Deion Sanders.
Sure. The second part is fine and it's true, but recruits and their parents would also like to see Deion at their house. That's what head coaches in college football do. It's a part of recruiting. And I'm sure they would love to have him walk through the front door if he's recruiting their child and cook a nice dinner. It's not like he has to go out like assistant coaches. The head coach can only go see a player one time on a home visit. So, they may recruit 10 high school players in a year. It's not a whole lot of work that they're asking of him to go out and pay some home visits. But hey, you know what? I may say it's unsustainable. You may say it's unsustainable. And Colorado might go out and prove all of us wrong in September and become the talk of the nation again and come into Lincoln on the 7th and win. We'll see. I mean, I don't think it's trending that way, but I didn't think it was trending that way a year ago at this time. So, all right, that wraps up our show today. Thanks for listening. We'll be back on Friday to wrap the week. Want to let you know that Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube, and now it's also available on Amazon Fire TV and the free Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today, now available free on the Fire TV channels app.